Hi everybody, welcome to IndyCar on the 24th of April 2019. I'm Gordon Ross. As you know, today the First Minister is due to make a public address at Holyrood this afternoon at 1:30 on the subject of the effect of Brexit on Scotland in the future, and also a statement, a more broad statement about Scotland's constitutional future, which I take it is code for we're going to talk about independence. Now, before we all start getting a bit overexcited about that, there are some other things to report today which are a little bit worrying, one of which is information which has surfaced today which shows that the Conservative Party has been secretly planning to privatise the healthcare of the workforce in England. Now, this is a privatisation where the NHS stops providing services and a private American company provides the healthcare services for those in employment. Now, I make this distinction very carefully. In employment, it is very similar to the American system where they have a two-tier health service where normally workers in America will pay into an insurance fund. They'll pay an insurance premium every month out of their salary, which covers any medical expenses they might incur through going to hospital or having an operation or falling ill. Which sounds fine in theory, except that the problem with privatising medical care, in particular in the UK, is that that company, whichever one it is going to charge extra for this service. Now, the NHS, as you know, doesn't make a profit, doesn't operate to make a profit, but a private healthcare company exists to make a profit. Therefore, its services are bound to be far more expensive. Now, I'm going to come back to this story in a minute. The final story on today's programme is about the psychological effect of lying on people's decisions when they're asked to make political choices. Now, I'm going to come back to that story in a moment as well. It has some very interesting findings, which to some degree actually vindicates something which Alistair Carmichael once said about lying being acceptable in politics. Again, we'll come back to this story in a little while. But back to the subject at hand. As you know, the First Minister is due today to make a statement at Holyrood at 1:30 on Scotland's place in Europe, how Brexit affects things at the moment, where we stand basically, where the whole country stands with regards to Brexit. Now, in the process of, or just before this process kicks off, there has also been debate this week at Holyrood on the so-called continuity bill. This is a Scottish piece of legislation which enables Scotland to take unreserved laws which were part of the European Union's law system and repatriate them back to Scotland because they're not reserved. There are 111 laws coming back from Europe when we leave the European Union. 24 of these are contested by the English government, who want them to be reserved, even though they're not actually reserved matters for Westminster. Remember, the law of devolution basically says that anything that is not reserved is devolved. So these laws, 111 of them, which were not included in the list of reserved powers, should come back to Scotland. And Holyrood is debating that this week and trying to bring this law into effect, this piece of legislation which will bring these laws back to Scotland and have them embedded in our legal system here. So Scotland's future and Scotland's everyday running is still happening at Holyrood, despite business being interrupted for this announcement this afternoon. Now, many people have seen this announcement either as an optimistic sign that Nicola Sturgeon is about to announce a date for a second independence referendum, or those pessimists among us and the cynics among us are expecting her to give us a bit of waffle and a little bit of flannel, and to just tell us that there's going to be a referendum when we get a Section 30 order, and we don't know when that will be. So we're expecting some vagary. The trailers for this event today have strongly suggested that there won't be a date for a referendum, and most of the media is reporting this as a fact. It's not expected that the First Minister will name a date for a referendum. But it occurred to me just before going on air that from about the beginning of May onwards, so just the end of this month in fact, until October, is a period of approximately 4 months. There's about 16 weeks. 16 weeks is about the length of time it takes to organise and run your own referendum. Now, we have had this argument time and again about whether we should wait for a Section 30 order. Now, how many times has the Section 30 order actually been asked for and denied? I think at the moment it's only once, and I'm pretty sure that this, if it happens again, this is going to be the second time of asking. And I would estimate that by the time we get to the third time of asking, so we start to say to Mrs May, we want a Section 30 order, we have that right under the Claim of Right, a piece of legislation which passed unopposed through the Houses of Parliament in Westminster last summer. So give us the Section 30 order or else. If they deny it a third time, then you could say with absolute certainty that they're being unreasonable. You've asked once, you've asked twice, you've asked a third time, and all you're asking for is something which the British government has already agreed to give you, that they cannot withhold. If they withhold it 3 times or more, then I think we'd have to say it's 3 strikes and you're out. If that happens, then is there any real reason why we couldn't have an advisory referendum, let's say in September or towards the end of September? I don't really see any reason why not, because let's think about this for a moment. When we had a referendum in 1979, which was run by the British government, we won it. In other words, we won the debate, and we got over 51% for Home Rule. And yet the British government then moved the goalpost and said, but you didn't get more than 50% of the electorate. So they put a condition on it after the fact. When the referendum was held on Brexit, there was nothing put in place that said it had to be more than 50% of the electorate. And yet the Brexit vote, when it did come, was less than 40% of the electorate who actually voted. It was 32% or something like that of the electors in the United Kingdom actually voted for Brexit. So it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination decisive. If the Scottish government had said, but you haven't got 50% of the electorate, you haven't got over the line with your 51.9% here, that doesn't represent. And yet the British government didn't employ that same trick in their own referendum. Let's say we do have a referendum and it's an advisory referendum and we run it, then we can set the rules. And we can say at the beginning of the referendum that if somebody tries to, say they tried to boycott it, for example, any boycotted vote, any vote that isn't made or is spoiled deliberately will be counted as a yes vote. We can decide the rules at the beginning. We can say that. When you run a referendum, as long as you make the rules plain to everybody, then you can make it illegal for somebody to boycott that referendum deliberately. And if they do boycott it, the price of their boycott is losing that referendum. So if they really want to defeat independence, they're forced to vote. Now, I don't see any reason why when you organise your own referendum, you cannot preset the rules. Because you're having a referendum in your own country about something that only concerns your own country. And if your government has set up the laws to run that referendum, then like the British state, we can say categorically that everybody must vote, either yes or no. Anybody who does not vote won't be counted. Those who boycott deliberately will basically be making a yes vote. We can set these rules. If people don't vote, then we take that to mean they don't mind what the result is. You can set rules like this at the beginning of a referendum as long as they are made clear to the electors. If the electors know the rules, then they won't boycott. There have been talks of the Tories boycotting a referendum run by the Scottish Government on independence as an advisory referendum. But as I say, you can make rules that will stop any kind of boycott from taking place. And if that happens, then the Tories will be forced to vote. And as we know, the Tories always get their voters out. About 96% turnout for Tory voters is normal. So in order to win a referendum ourselves, we'd still have to work damned hard to make sure that we got a substantial majority, certainly over 55% at least. I would be wanting to go for 60 to be sure. So it is possible to have a referendum. We've always known it's possible to have a referendum. And if it looks as though the referendum, as if it looks as if Brexit is going to happen by default because no action has been taken and nothing's been agreed by October, then having a referendum on independence would make a lot of sense, especially if it were to happen, let's say, just before the Brexit deadline, maybe several weeks before. Because at that point we would have a mandate from the people for independence, to back away from Brexit and for Scotland to separate itself from England. And this would put a great deal of pressure on English voters to decide whether they really want Brexit for themselves or not. Because if they can't take Scotland with them and they can't take Scotland's resources with them, then what do they have to live on after the Brexit? It's going to make them think again. Alright, these are just my own thoughts here. But I don't see any real reason why a referendum in Scotland would be illegal or that it would be boycotted successfully by anybody. As long as the rules are published well in advance, agreed in Parliament, published so that all parties and every elector knows the rules, then if they attempt to boycott it, and we see a strong boycotting of, shall we say, the Tory voters, just for talking's sake, then they're basically acquiescing to the result of the referendum. If they don't vote, then they have to accept the result. That's all you have to say. They cannot gainsay it by not turning up. We can make that rule. I don't know what Nicola's going to say today. I can't really even guess. I mean, I could say I think she's going to be terribly cautious. She's probably going to kick the can down the road a bit further. She's going to say all the right things, that we're working towards independence. We're going to debate the currency issue. We're going to get that sorted out. We're going to get the central bank idea sorted out. All those things are needed. And all those things are part of the structures that need to be put in place before we have a referendum. But that can be done. And it can be done in 16 weeks. And we can convince the public. Now, I mentioned to you that in the second part of this broadcast I was going to talk about the health service. We now know through various reports that have surfaced online that Jeremy Hunt and several other key senior Tory ministers have been visiting a company in California which provides health services in America. And they have what you might call a mid-Atlantic division. This is a part of the company which has been set up to attempt to take over the NHS. Now, to do this takeover of the NHS, the Tory party had to do one particular thing to change the NHS so that this privatisation could take place without any real problems. And that was to create commissioning bodies. In other words, groups of GPs or GP surgeries who would commission health services, who would buy health services for that area. Now, having set up these commissioning groups in the English NHS, this is a precondition of the California company because it's part of their business model. There have to be commissioning groups in a locale which can then buy the services from this company. Now, as I said, it's a profit-making company. It's based in California. It is waiting in the wings to come in and privatise the NHS, and it explains largely why the Conservative Party has spent absolutely no money on the NHS whatsoever in is allowing it to run down to the point where it's on the verge of collapse, so that they can then say, oh look, the NHS is broken, here's a nice company from California who can just walk straight in and take it over and make it all better for you. So everybody who works in England will be able to have even better healthcare than they have now, and they just pay for it out of their wages each month. Sounds terrific, but it already exists and it's called the NHS, so you don't actually need it. But this is what the Tories are planning for England. Now, if you think that's not going to affect Scotland, you'd be wrong, because if you stop funding the NHS in England, due to the Barnett consequentials, this is the calculation that is made about spending in England and the percentage of spending in Scotland, if you drop the spending on NHS in England, then there is a corresponding drop in funding to the Scottish NHS. Although we run the Scottish NHS, we don't fund it. We are still dependent on money coming from England, which is our money, but they are controlling it. So we'd have a problem with that. So this is something I wanted to warn people about, and there's been a few articles and interesting posts online today concerning this problem in England, and we're hoping that it won't come to that. But once Brexited, this is exactly the kind of thing the Tories are wanting to do. And that brings me to the final part of today's show, which is concerning how people are influenced when they vote on important issues. Let's take, for example, climate change. Now, we know that climate change is happening. We're told every day 97% of climate scientists across the globe agree that man-made global warming is happening now. The ice caps are melting far more rapidly than they would naturally. The sea levels are rising rapidly. Hundreds of animals are going extinct all the time. We're killing them off by our activities. And yet, somebody like Donald Trump can say it's all a hoax. And believe it or not, when he says it's all a hoax, that has an effect on the way people think. A study by psychologists has proved that when you present an intelligent but undecided person with a set of truths and a set of lies, something interesting happens. If you tell them the truth about something, and you keep telling them the truth about it, they begin to believe it. If you tell them the truth about it, and you keep telling them the truth about it, but somebody else starts denying it, but you keep telling them the truth, and this other person keeps denying it, they can't decide. And they remain stuck in the position that they were before, unable to decide or still entrenched in their previous mindset. Now, this is an interesting thing, and it proves something that Alistair Carmichael once said, which is that lying is okay in politics. Now, he said that, I think, is an off-the-cuff remark, but actually it's true. Lying is okay in politics because they know that it works. If we want to convince people of the merits of independence, we have to snuff out the lies. We have to stop the denials from getting out. We need to make sure that our positive messages outnumber the negative ones, or at the very least that we constantly rubbish the negative ones. And I mean constantly, day in and day out, that's rubbish, that's rubbish, that's rubbish. And constantly reinforce the positive messages of why independence is so much better than having England screw up the entire Scottish economy through a warped sense of imperialism or racism or xenophobia, whatever you want to call it, but basically it's based on a suspicion or a hatred of outsiders. If we allow the Brexit campaign, if you like, to overtake the independence campaign in terms of coverage, then this denial of independence will continue. And the more people hear this denial, we're not going to give you a Section 30 order. You can't do it. It's not allowed. You have to ask permission. We're not going to let you. We have to counter it every single time it happens. We can have a referendum. We are going to have a referendum. It doesn't matter about a Section 30 order. It never has mattered. The Tories are lying to you. It's lies, lies, lies all the time. Brexit is not good for you. Brexit is a horrible idea. Independence is a brilliant way to live. Scotland will be fantastically successful. And this is what we have to start doing. If we want to win this battle, we have to overwhelm the deniers, because we know psychologically that when they start issuing these denials, it prevents people from taking that vital step. And in this case, the psychology of voting means that we have to overwhelm these denials, and we have to come out with our denials of the denials. If you're going to stop people being confused, you have to expose the denials as lies. And that's why shows like this exist. That's why Wings Over Scotland exists. That's why people like Wee Ginger Doug, even Bella Caledonia, and lots of other writers, including guys like Grouse Peter's, a fantastic writer as well. There are lots of us, but we need more of us, and we need to be saying these messages much, much louder than we are. And we need to stop doubting ourselves, and we need to stop doubting our leadership. This is precisely what the mainstream media is for. It's there to overwhelm the undecided voters with negativity so that they don't move. We've done a great job of building up independence into the the ray of sunshine that it is compared to Brexit and continuing decline of the failing English economy, the failing borrowing, the debt mountain, the unemployment that's coming, the weakness of the pound. We need to keep pushing that as well. But we have to fight hard. This is an information war, but it's a psychological war as well. And we at the moment have been holding our own until now, but it's not started yet. And after Nicola's speech today, I predict that the amount of doomsayers coming out of the UK media is going to ramp up dramatically. And that's what I'm trying to warn you about today, especially with things like the health service. I mentioned that today because it's true that the government has been visiting this company repeatedly, time upon number, in California to get information and to make contact with them. They are going to usher them in the back door, and they're going to partly privatise the National Health Service under the guise of rescuing it from failure, rescuing itself from collapse. And we can't let that happen in England, partly for the benefit of our English friends and relatives, but also for our own benefit, because our NHS is not immune to this. It will be infected because of the Barnett system of consequential payments. So we must protect ourselves. So every single one of us out there is going to have to speak out whenever we see or hear something which is a lie, or which is denying that independence is possible, or which denies that we're entitled to a vote. We're entitled, not only are we entitled, we demand it. We need to say this loudly also to our own leadership, that we believe them, that we back them, and that we are united behind them. Because if we do that, we'll be the only people in the whole of the UK who are united in one particular political aim. And that wins hearts and minds better than anything else. Anyway, that's about it for today. But I thought it's worth knowing that this psychological technique that the British use, which is to pollute the positive message with lots of little negative ones, so that the people who would cross over to our side don't take that step. They just stay stuck, mired in indecision. We need to change that. We need to make them not trust the deniers. We need to make them distrust the UK and to trust us instead. And to do that, we need to work harder, and we need to shout louder than them, and we need to shout more often than them. And that is what little shows like this is all about. Anyway, have a good day, everybody. I look forward to hearing what Nicola has to say, but be ready. You're going to be called into action, and not just online here. You'll be called into action on the streets, to rallies, to fundraisers, to door knocking, bumper stickers, posters, you name it. You're going to be working hard for this. I'll see you all later. Bye bye for now.